This is exactly the place where we need to start calling for peace and opposing constant calls for more and more killing. We are complicit in this. We are a part of it because our government continues to fund Israel.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
So we're going to continue a theme of internationalism by bringing on Brandon Mancilla, UAW Region 9A Director, that is up in the Northeast, about the UAW's call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Brandon, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Great to have you. Big fan of what you're doing up there, and appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. So, I think one thing that may be worth starting the conversation with just explaining to people what is happening in Gaza, because I think that one of the reasons that there are such divergent opinions on the situation in Gaza is that there are some people who actually see physically videos of stuff that's going on, and it's coming across their social media feeds, and they're inundated day after day, hour by hour with scenes from Gaza. And then there are other people who never hear anything about it. They're in just a totally different bubble, and they never hear about it. And then when they do, it's all kind of euphemistic language, and they're not really getting an understanding of what's going on. So that maybe that's a good place to start. Can explain to us generally what is happening in Gaza?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say that I'm a big fan of your show. Our assistant director in Region 9A, Vail Kunert-Yant, is also a religious listener of your show. So we really appreciate this invitation and chance to talk with all of you, and really love the work you guys do. We need more of it.
Well,
so
appreciate it, and we'll have to get Vail on the show at some point too.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think she'd love to also. So yeah, what's happening right now in Palestine and Israel is it's absolutely a tragedy. Since October 7th, there have been over 30,000 that we know of, Palestinians that have been killed in Israel's retaliatory bombing campaign in Gaza. As of right now, over 1 million people are at risk of famine because humanitarian aid cannot enter Gaza because Israel is blocking the aid coming in. And it's in my opinion, a deliberate policy of starving out the Palestinian people, and it's a genocide that Israel's now carrying out and using October 7th as a reason to carry out this policy. All of this is being done with support of the U.S. government through the weapons and the political backing, even though, the reports now is that there's some tension between the Biden administration and the Secretary of State and Netanyahu's government. Even though that may be true, it's not enough that from keeping the U.S. from continuing to support Israel's campaign right now. So not enough has happened yet to actually challenge that status quo. But I think what it's really important to figure out is that October 7th was not the beginning of this crisis. We're talking about a long history here of oppression, of dispossession, of apartheid that has created the conditions for what is happening right now. So it's absolutely a moral responsibility for all people of conscience, for the labor movement, for social movements as a whole in the United States, to continue pushing and pressuring our own government, because that's what we can control. Our people, the American people, can pressure our government from stopping its direct support for the state of Israel's extreme policies and its campaign against the Palestinian people right now. And the reason this is important, right, to understand that not all of this began on October 7th is because at some point, too late, but at some point the bombing will stop, right? And we're going to have a real reckoning with what the aftermath of that is, and not simply return to what the status quo was before October, which was also untenable and unbearable for so many people. So the only way forward is to actually really analyze what that situation was, which, in my opinion, a situation of apartheid, of massive oppression and restriction on the Palestinian people. And the only way to build a legitimate, lasting peace process, one that recognizes the humanity of Palestinians and Israeli people alike, is one that actually commits to that peace and finds a different way, a different political, economic, and social system in the region that accounts for everyone's humanity.
Right, right. Well, and having laid out some of that, then I think the next question is, in particular to what's happening now, right? Is why is that something that we should oppose in the United States? Because the people that support it would say, sure, yeah, it's sad that there are innocent people dying, but this is war, and this has to happen. This must happen for anything to move forward is what they're going to say. And so why is it that we should actually we shouldn't believe that, and that we should oppose what's going on right now in Gaza?
Yeah, so obviously, I think as a moral responsibility, this should matter to all people of conscience, as I said, and especially in the labor movement. An injury to one is an injury to all. That's a key pillar of what we believe solidarity means, right? Standing with all oppressed people. But I'll go further than that. The reality is that we are complicit, right, as Americans with our taxpayer dollars and with our government's policies and political support towards the state of Israel in perpetuating not just the killing right now, but also the system that allowed the conditions for this to happen in the first place, right? So our own taxpayer dollars, our weapons, our political resources, the politicians we elect, they're all still, for the vast majority, the most part, are giving vocal and concrete support, right? So if you are a person who believes that there should be peace, that there should be an end to mass killing and starvation, then you need to point the finger to the people who are responsible for carrying that out, right? So, the United States government does not control the state of Israel, but it does provide the key resources and political support and the weapons to be able to allow Israel to carry out its campaign right now. So that's exactly the reason why we should care about it, because we are directly tied to it.
And I think that's a good thing to emphasize, because there are, in talking about this, maybe the next thing is like, okay, maybe even it's bad. Maybe even they'll grant you like, okay, sure, maybe it's bad. Let's just grant that for the sake of conversation. But why are you so focused on Israel? Why Israel? Why is Israel the center of a lot of this discussion about foreign policy? And it's exactly like you say. It's not anti-Semitic. It's not terror supporting. It's that we are intimately involved in what's going on here. Unlike some of the other lots of terrible things are going on all over the world, but we are not really as involved in a lot of those terrible things. And then in some places where we are involved in the terrible things, like what's going on with Yemen and Saudi Arabia, the defenders of U.S. action are not as vociferous, right? I mean, there's a whole cadre of people that defend to the hilt every single action that Israel takes. And it's just not that way with what's going on with Saudi Arabia, right? We support Saudi Arabia, and you and I haven't talked to you about Saudi Arabia, but I'm fairly confident that I can say that you're not a supporter of the Saudi regime, and we oppose that, but we don't have people on the other side making an entire career of being Saudi apologists, right? It just doesn't happen. People kind of accept it and move on, and that's just the way it is. But with Israel, it's different. There's a whole complex of people that are dedicated to defending Israel, and so when you have one intimate connection to what's going on there, and two, vociferous pushback against the most banal observations of what's going on, then of course we're going to have to talk about it, and we're probably going to have to talk about it a little bit more, right? I mean, you know, what do you think about that? How does that track with your understanding of you know, how you would respond to people who say that you know it's anti-Semitic to oppose Israel's actions, or you know that would call you a Hamas supporter?
Mhm. Well, I mean, the number one thing is I am not a Hamas supporter. You know, I'm a left-wing labor organizer. You know, I think the ideology that Hamas as a movement subscribes to is not the one that I share. It's not the vision of the world that I subscribe to. But I think it's really important to emphasize that what's happening right now is government policy and retaliation for an attack on October 7th that at this point has been completely disproportionate, right, to the original attack by Hamas, right? And it's a policy of, at this point, mass starvation and a plausible case of genocide, as the International Court of Justice has preliminarily decided, right? So we're talking about 1 million people at risk of dying of starvation, right? That is much bigger than when any one political group is capable of doing in Palestine. So the criticism of the state of Israel, it's very important for everyone to recognize this, is not the same as anti-Semitism. And there's many number of reasons for that. Number one is that many, you know, pro-peace Jewish labor activists, Jewish activists, social movement leaders, and including increasingly people within Israel itself, are criticizing their own government's actions at this point, right? So it's really important for us to be able to speak out about this in a way that's you know, morally responsible and correct, to completely unattach those from each other. So yeah, criticism of Israel is not the same as anti-Semitism. Any government led by any people, any group of people who are carrying out this level of violence needs to be opposed and criticized by labor and by people of conscience. And that's just the bottom line for me. The bottom line is you see a government that has at this point killed more than 30,000 people that we know of, right? This toll is growing tragically. That is not a government that we are supposed to stand by and make apologies for. Now, there's a long history. I'm not, you know, an expert on the history of the region like some other people would be able to explain to you just how exactly we got to this point with this very close relationship between the U.S. and the state of Israel. But the reason is that it exists, right? And you know, there's a very long history for that. But you know, I think increasingly younger people and more you know, Americans are coming to a real awakening at this point, that if you care about, you know, even the future of the Middle East and the end of global conflict or potential global conflict, right? If you don't want another world war, if you don't want another, you know, Middle East, at least regional conflict, this one this is exactly the place where we need to start calling for peace and opposing, you know, the constant calls for more and more killing. And again, we are responsible. We are complicit in this. We are a part of it because our government continues to fund and politically back the actions of Israel.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate. And then I think the next question is, okay, well, so even let's say that you can have this opinion as a citizen, as an individual, and maybe that makes sense, and all of this, and you know, you can put on your citizen cap and you can say, you know, I oppose what's going on in Israel. But why should you be doing this in your capacity as a labor leader, as one of the, you know, regional directors of the UAW, one of the largest unions in the United States, you know, one of the, you know, how many regions are there? 9 or 10? You know, I mean, there's not... Yeah, there are not very many region directors, and so you're kind of really getting into the upper echelon of kind of labor in the United States. And so why should labor be involved? Why is it that you're doing this in your capacity as a labor leader as opposed to your capacity as a citizen? Why is it that unions should be thinking about and talking about and advocating for foreign policy positions at all?
Well, I think it's really important to recognize that unions like the UAW and other national unions in our country and international unions have always taken political positions. This idea that unions are not political organizations is completely off. Like, unions are political organizations. We constantly donate, just at the very a basic fact that we donate a lot of money, right, to candidates, right, for office. We do lobbying on worker issues, on union issues. So we're political organizations, and that is not a bad thing. I think we need to be democratic political organizations. I mean, we need to represent the interests and the issues of our members. But there's no such thing as an apolitical union. That's number one. Number two, unions have also taken foreign policy positions, right? Throughout the Cold War, during World War II, and even very recently, at the war in Iraq, unions took stances, right? During World War II, we supported the war effort against Nazi Germany, for example, right? Throughout the Cold War, unions were split on how exactly whether they were going to support, the U.S. in that Cold War divide, right? At times, we've also broken with U.S. policies, such as the interventions in Central America in the 1980s and the war in Iraq in 2003 and after that, right? So unions are not organizations that stay out of these discussions. They have stayed out of talking about Palestine and Israel. And that hides the fact that for a long time, we've actually been pretty supportive of the state of Israel, right? From its founding up until very recently. A lot of, the history of the founding of the state of Israel had a lot of labor support, including U.S. labor support, including also the UAW. Actually, there's some institutions and organizations in Israel that have the names of U.S. labor leaders, for example. So we have been involved and taken positions in support. But why should we care, right? Why should we care as union members, and why should we care as union leaders? I think that the reason is because when labor gets serious about a political issue or a social movement, right, it's the organization that has the power to actually change things. Number one, because we have the ability to shut down industry or the sector that we've organized in, right? We have the ability to withhold our labor, right? But second, we have immense political power, right? Just look at how, we were able to navigate in the UAW, the Big Three strike and the just transition language that we won to be able to secure EV jobs and battery jobs of the future for our UAW members now, right? That took a lot. That wasn't just a strike. That was also our political power and our political influence and the weight of our endorsements that led to that, right? So when labor commits to something, it gives other social movement organizations, other activists, other communities a real big muscle behind demands, right? And I think that's really important. I think the other reason we should care is as leaders, right? I'll speak from the leadership side now, is because our members care, right? We're going through a crazy, awesome momentum right now in organizing, right? From Starbucks to our auto sector to higher ed to every single industry you can think of right now is really hot because workers want to organize and they want to join unions because they want justice. They want economic and social justice and improving working conditions, right? Who doesn't want that? But as we've organized more and more, especially with younger workers, we're realizing that, people, the consciousness in this country has changed, right? So workers are coming into their unions for the first time, right? With different ideas and perspectives on what the world should look like and what our position as a country should be in relation to something like Palestine, right? That's in the ceasefire. That's like a really that's been very clear for all of us that have been in the UAW is just how many members organically, without any, necessarily any resolution at a local or from the international, have already been organizing. And they've been organizing, I think, really important, right, rank and file members with their UAW hats on, right? With their jackets on, with their swag, meaning they identify them protesting in the street with their labor union identity, right? It's the same thing to them. It's like, if I am a UAW member, I am an SEIU member, I am a teacher, and I am also doing this, I'm also showing up to this protest, my body out in the street with my swag on, right? That's been a very important change, where in the past, I think people were just like, there's always been protests, but has it always been carrying that labor label with you, right? That's been a really huge change. So how things have moved within, I think, the entire labor movement, right? We've gone from 6 months ago or 5 months ago, however long it's been, Mark Dimmenstein, the Postal Workers Union president, being the only person on the executive council. Shawn Fain wasn't at that meeting, but Dimmenstein being the only person in the council who was calling for a ceasefire, to the entire AFL calling for a ceasefire, and almost every affiliate coming out with their own statement, right? Or their own resolution. That didn't just happen, right? Because people had a change of heart. That took immense pressure, and for that reason, we have to look at what workers were doing, and it's still not, I would say, so widespread that it's, I think, the central labor political demand of the moment, but it's growing, it's getting there, and we can't ignore what happened in states like Michigan, where there's no path to the White House for Joe Biden this fall without Michigan. And he had 100,000 people vote uncommitted, right? He needs to think about that. He absolutely needs to reconcile with that.
Yes. And, just speaking very briefly on that, the people who vote uncommitted are actually probably some of the most committed people, in actuality. These are the people that like want to come out and vote against a Republican, and they're wanting to send you a message, right, that they are unhappy. That people who are actually uncommitted are the tens, hundreds of thousands of people who stayed home, right, and who you need to activate, and who you need to encourage to get to the polls, and you have to have those people who voted uncommitted to activate them, right? Those are going to be your people that would normally be, staffing your campaign, volunteering for your campaign, knocking on doors, making phone calls. And if you're not able to activate your activists, you're not going to be able to get the people who are truly uncommitted to even come out to vote, much less to vote for you. So I think that's an incredibly important point. But back to if I could, just to build on the justification for unions making foreign policy positions, or having foreign policy positions, it's worth noting that deciding to not have a foreign policy position is a foreign policy position, right? I mean, it's not as if that has no effect, but the effect is you are taking the organized working class out of the decision-making process. That is the political decision when unions choose to stay out of foreign policy discussions. You are taking the organized working class out of the decision-making process. And that's a political decision, and it's a political decision I oppose, because I think you're exactly right that unions are political institutions, and the idea that we should not think of ourselves that way is completely backwards, right? And even what we're doing in the workplace is political. If you because politics is not just what people think, is not just what people do every 4 years, voting for a Republican or a Democrat. Politics is people's lives and how we, operate and move within society and how we want to change society. And so obviously what we do in the workplace through our unions is political, and we need to understand that, and we need our members to understand that, and we need our members to understand that as unions, we are the organized working class, and so everything should be our issue because our members are affected by every issue. Even if it's not going to affect your wages at work, you as a working class member of society are affected by every single thing that our government and our society does or doesn't do, and therefore it is absolutely in the purview of your union to comment on it. Now, you can choose to have your union not comment on it, but that's a political decision, and we should recognize it as such. And maybe sometimes that's the appropriate decision, but we should recognize it as political. So and then, like you said, once we understand that we're going to be making a political decision one way or another, it absolutely makes sense to fight for peace, because an injury to one is an injury to all, and that's a really kind of fundamental union principle, the principle of solidarity. And so now that so I think that everybody listening is on board. So we've got everybody, Brandon, you and I, everybody's on board. We should support a ceasefire in Gaza. Unions should support a ceasefire in Gaza as unions. And so now that we've done this, we've really done a lot today. What are we doing, actually? So we've got everybody on board. What are we doing as unions to make this happen? Calling for a ceasefire. What's going on now?
Yeah, so I think again, after the UAW's call for a ceasefire, the immediate next step that we got to work on was getting more and more unions to come out as well, right? And I think that has been a shift that just even, again, 3, 4, 5 months ago, nobody would have thought possible. The next step to me is political. I think we need to support the champions of labor in elected offices who have come out, consistently been brave and stood for a ceasefire from the very beginning. I'm talking about people like Rashida Tlaib, people like Jamal Bowman in my own region, who are being attacked, right? Are being attacked by hard right-wing, genocidal, forces in this country, who not only want to continue to support the policy of the state of Israel, but also want to undo labor power, right? And fight, completely repress what we've seen, the gains in the labor movement recently. And I'm talking about organizations such as AIPAC there, right? So I think we need to, stand behind people like Rashida, people like Bowman, and other progressive anti-war champions that have stood for a ceasefire and have also supported labor at every point in their careers and put their names out for us. I think we also have to start thinking as unions, right? Our own resources. Right now, we are working on investigating the possibilities of divestment from Israeli-backed securities, investments, and bonds. These are investments that directly contribute to the state of Israel's financial capacity to be able to do the things that it's doing right now. And I think the labor movement needs to look really closely at its pensions, at its strike funds, at its general fund investments, and actually start making moves to divest those resources. Because again, if the International Court of Justice is saying there's a plausible case of genocide, then the labor movement has no business investing its money, its resources, its members' pensions, its staff's pensions in the state of Israel. So that's something that we're considering doing right now, and working on. We're not there yet, but I think we're looking into it. And I think in general, we have to look at Carl Rosen, the president of the United Electrical Workers (UE), published an article just recently in Labor Notes about just how long-term the effort of UE being a champion of solidarity, international solidarity, how much work that has taken, right? How much deep member organizing, educational work that has taken. And I think we need to use this as an opportunity, right? I think the labor movement was tragically extremely behind on being able to respond to this moment. And I think now we're finally seeing, a shift that was welcome, but it's definitely, slow. But unions like the UE decided to commit to studying, its own involvement in, international issues and committing to solidarity over years, right? So they have a whole platform on international solidarity, on the role of workers in the war economy, things like that, right? That's something that UE had committed to. And I think, unions such as ours, other unions would also, I think, really benefit from kind of shifting to that work, so that, the next time there's another issue, or again, like I said, the bombs are going to stop at some point right, in Palestine, and we're still going to be seeing the same injustices and abuses of power and conditions that led to this in the first place. We have to commit to making sure that we are educated and ready and organized to continue, standing in solidarity. So there's just a lot. You can point to so many different places, right? And I think politically, right? The labor movement has been very tied to the Democratic Party for a very long time. I think we don't have much choice in this country, right, between two parties. One or two people is going to be president every election cycle. But we know that within the Democratic Party, this issue specifically has started splintering certain elements within the party. And I think labor has a real choice to make, right? Which candidates are we going to support, right? Are we going to be able to elevate the ceasefire demand or any other demands for social and international solidarity to the forefront, right? That's something in my region that some of our political councils have already asked for, to be able to ask any candidate that we are interviewing what its position on a ceasefire is, right? Labor has the ability to do that, again, because we have the resources. We have the ability to actually not just protest and say something. We have the ability to actually back things up with resources and support and labor power. So there's a litany of things we could do, and I think it's a really important moment for, I think, labor leaders to listen to its membership and support it.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.